Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Making Milestones podcast after a relatively long, kind of unplanned hiatus. I kind of took most of December off because things just got hectic, and every time I planned to record a podcast, it just wasn't happening because I just had stuff to do. So apologies for that. This episode is actually not going to be my year recap. Usually the first episode I do in the new year or the last episode that I do of like the end of the year is my year recap. I'm going to do that one next week instead, just because I don't have it in me right now to do it. 2024 was a doozy. It was a lot. So there's a lot to recap in that year, but instead, I kind of wanted to talk about the importance of like developing like self-assurance and being able to like have enough trust in your own ability to make decisions, know who you are, and feel comfortable in those decisions without validation from others. And this applies like a lot in the horse world because what I find is a lot of the times people get the most defensive online and in person when it comes to horse things are when they feel like their decision making or their belief system is being threatened by someone else when that person doesn't agree with them. And then it can become this kind of contentious thing where people feel like they are being slighted because someone doesn't agree with them. And that sometimes is the case where someone will be adversarial and they'll disagree with you and it'll actually be like a personal thing. But there's a lot of times where people just hold different opinions and it has nothing to do with you personally. And then it's just taken personally. And in my opinion, a lot of that stems from insecurity. And we all have insecurities, so that's not a dig at anybody because everyone has insecurity. Everyone's going to feel that way sometimes. But it is something that I think is important in developing better horsemanship because at the end of the day, no matter how good your horsemanship is, no matter how good your horse management is, there's always going to be people who will disagree with it. And there's always going to be people who will have opinions where they're not aligned with yours and where you have to be able to stand by what you're doing and feel good about it, even in the absence of someone else validating that. And that is an important skill to learn. And it also creates like self-trust. And it also makes it so that like that part of that self-trust, it isn't blindly only following your own perspective and never seeking outside guidance from anywhere. That self-trust includes having an inner close circle of people whose opinion you trust and who you can go to for guidance should you need to. So those people can be friends, family members, your mentors, people in your close inner circle that you can seek out help from whenever you need to, and that you can trust to go to for an honest opinion and confide in and do what you need to do. So it isn't just blindly following your own perspective, never questioning yourself, never looking up alternative information and like laying into like cognitive bias. That's not what this is about. Self-trust is also trusting your ability to keep learning and growing, to seek out new information, to start anew should you need to. If you find out information that entirely conflicts with all of your belief systems and it crumbles before you when you realize that you were headed down the wrong path, it's the trust that you can rebuild from that, the trust that you can continue learning, that things can fall apart and that you can come back from that and continue on your merry way and do so without other people supporting you through that the whole time. And obviously we all, like all of us need social bonds with other people. So this also isn't saying that you should be able to be completely alone. What I mean by not having other people validate you, it's like outside sources. So it's your peers, it's people on the internet. It can even be clinicians and like other riding instructors and whatnot. They can even be standing up to your own riding instructor if they're suggesting things that make you really, really uncomfortable, and having the self-trust to stand by that discomfort and advocate for yourself and your horse, even when you're standing up against someone who has a perceived higher amount of experience than you, because experience as a trainer doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing everything ethically. So developing that self-trust is like an asset as a horse person, but it'll also change your entire life because it'll allow you to find the most authentic version of yourself and be the most you that you can be. Because as long as we are seeking validation from outside sources and basically making decisions based off of who agrees with them, we're never fully serving ourselves. We're never fully honoring ourselves and what we actually want to do. We are kind of wearing a mask and trying to appease other people by behaving and speaking the way that makes them most comfortable. And this is especially important in the horse world, I would say, because there is a lot of judgment in the horse world. There's a lot of fighting amongst people in the horse world. There's a lot of really loud, controversial opinions. There's a lot of arguments. There's a lot of people who have a my way or the highway mentality who, if you do disagree with them, will get really mad. And that kind of leans into what I'm saying here about developing self-trust. The people who completely implode when you hold your ground and disagree with them respectfully probably lack a certain level of self-trust, because if they truly believed in the decisions that they're making and what they're doing and believed in themselves as a horse person, it wouldn't fry their brain and crumple their perspective on things to the extent that it does when you see people get super angry when they're disagreed with. It wouldn't create that response if they were really confident in themselves. And I'm going to use myself as an example for this, because I would say that I see this dynamic a lot on my posts. I tend to see it the most with people who are quite a bit older than me, who feel like they are owed, like that I owe it to them to view their knowledge as superior simply because they have more years on this planet than me. And when I hold my ground in my disagreement with people like this, there are people who are older than me that completely lose their shit. They lose their minds. They get really angry. And there's a handful of them who, because of this anger and because of this like level of self-righteousness that they feel and how they feel like I'm defying them or like doing them a disservice in some capacity by not agreeing with them, they keep coming back to my pages to argue their point. And like, little do they know, they're actually boosting my posts more than actual fans do because they comment so much. But also, it's not going to change my perspective. Like, you can't bully me into agreeing with you. It doesn't make me respect them more. It doesn't make their opinions more knowledgeable, and it doesn't buffer their personal beliefs in any capacity. All it does is waste their own time. And essentially what they're doing is yelling at a brick wall, because it's what they're saying isn't being received by me, because it's all about them trying to fight to get me to basically obey them and agree with them. And the reason why I'm referencing this type of dynamic is because I think this is an indicator of someone who is very insecure and who needs validation to feel more secure in themselves. And especially when there's someone who is at an age where they can often use their age to garner immediate respect or compliance from people younger than them and use it as a means of suggesting that they have like a perceived expert opinion on something. When someone younger than them doesn't fall into that order, they implode. They don't know how to respond to it. And they continue to try to seek that validation by just basically badgering the people who refuse to agree with them and fall into line. And it's an unhealthy place to be, because again, people who do this, I notice a lot of the same tactics that they use to try to essentially bully me into complying, where they'll just be like, you're a nobody, you know nothing, you're just young and inexperienced. And if they truly believed that, they wouldn't waste their time trying to fight to get me to agree with them. They would just be like, what an idiot, and they would move on. And they could complain about me on their own pages, but they wouldn't spend their time trying to go out of their way to interact with me, because if they truly did think I was a nobody, they wouldn't be doing that. So that's another thing too. If you ever find that people are giving you trouble and they're responding the way that I'm talking about, it could be coming from a place of that, where they're actually very insecure and they're trying to get your validation to make themselves feel superior in that moment, because it has really bruised their ego to have you disagree with them. So notice these dynamics in your personal relationships, in your trainer-student relationships and whatnot, because it will help you decipher whether or not someone is responding, like projecting their own issues on you, or whether or not it might actually have something to do with you. Most of the time, it has a lot more to do with them than it does with you, because people who are also truly secure, like professionals, trainers, clinicians, etc., they will be able to handle and field your questions and your concerns and areas where you're not so certain about their perspective on things without taking it super personally. They will be able to stand by what they advocate for and what they believe in training wise to such a way that they will not be threatened by you questioning them. It won't be a hit to their ego because they will view it as like a normal dynamic to kind of have these conversations and to have these discussions because they know enough about their craft to explain it. And again, that's a trait that you notice in people who are highly insecure. When you ask them questions, like especially when they're your mentors, because that's even more normal, you ask them questions, you ask them to explain themselves, and they respond with an immediate like anger and condescension, and they kind of put you down. That's not necessarily always true because obviously online there's things that are lost in translation and writing. You can't interpret tone really well in comments. And if you're on a page where you're fielding questions constantly where people are being condescending and they are disrespecting you, sometimes you get mixed up and you can respond to things in a way because you've interpreted them a different way. So it's not a foolproof way of doing that, but it's a pattern to notice, because I would say that if you notice that pattern within someone who is supposed to be your mentor, I would have it be a yellow flag, and I would be cautious about proceeding with that person as your sole mentor, because a good mentor should be able to field your questions and they should be excited about your curiosity and your desire to understand why things work the way that they do. So anyways, developing inner self-trust and not like seeking validation from people outside of you. Honestly, doing this requires practice. It's going to be like a lot of it is honestly just getting comfortable with the idea that you're not going to be liked by everyone. Not everyone's going to see eye to eye with you. Not everyone's going to agree with your perspective on the world. Not everyone's going to understand who you are as a person. And you're going to just have to accept that, because even if you changed yourself and tried to shape yourself to be exactly what each of these people wants, it's still not going to be enough for everyone. You're not going to win everyone over, and there's still going to be people who do not like you for who you are. And that is just a reality of life. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you're not enough. It's just that not everyone is going to be your cup of tea. And a way I would kind of flip this on its head is to think from your own perspective and go, do I like everyone I meet? Do I vibe with everyone that I meet? It doesn't necessarily mean that you hate them just because you don't vibe with them. There's going to be people who the way that they talk and their mannerisms might just annoy you. And it doesn't mean that you think they're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you hate them. It doesn't mean that you wish any ill will on them. It just means they are not for you. So consider that perspective and apply it to yourself, but from other people. There's going to be people who just do not vibe with you, and it's nothing personal. Similarly, there's going to be people who see aspects of who you are that they are lacking in themselves, and they are not going to like you because of that. There's going to be things that you own and that parts of yourself that you're more proud of and that you're more publicly showcasing, that you're not ashamed of, that they might be ashamed of if they do have those parts, and it will trigger them seeing you be yourself. And they're going to respond in a way where it becomes a personal thing where they just don't like you because of those aspects. But really, it's actually them projecting their own personal insecurities onto you. And this is super common on social media. It can even be something as simple as if you're getting more attention on social media than they are, and they would like that attention, or even if they're not even trying to get attention on social media, but they're jealous that you are getting it. That can be a source of anger for a lot of these people, and they'll lash out accordingly. So starting to realize that no matter what you do, no matter how likable, amazing, kind, no matter how many amazing traits you have, sometimes those amazing traits that you have are what are triggering people to not like you. Another thing that triggers a lot of people is advocating for yourself, holding your ground, having opinions on things and standing by them. Again, this kind of goes into people who are more insecure. A lot of people take someone's lack of agreement with their perspective as a personal attack, and it'll become a big thing where they feel like there's animosity or something, and they feel slighted because the only way that they would feel good in those types of discussions is if someone validated their perspective. So then if you refuse to because you do not agree with that perspective, they take it highly personally and they feel like it's a personal attack, when really all you're doing is standing your ground with your belief system on whatever the topic is. But this is an issue in friendships too. It's not just like within the horse world. It's in any type of relationship this can arise. So it's also important to look at it like that. Disagreement is not necessarily an expression of not liking the person you're disagreeing with or having any other issue. It also doesn't mean that you think they're a bad person. It also doesn't mean that you don't value their perspectives on other things. You just don't agree with them on that thing. So I think a huge part of this is learning how to separate opinions and your viewpoints and perspectives on things from the entirety of who you are as a person, and also doing that for other people. And that's not to say that there aren't certain things that if someone has an opinion on them, that it would be a deal breaker on whether or not you want that person in life, because there's ethics and moral things that if you do not see eye to eye with someone on, that they will be a big problem. And that's a totally valid boundary to set. So it's like you can have your deal breakers, but having one of your deal breakers be like, I can't be around anyone who disagrees with me ever, is basically just wanting to seek out and create an echo chamber. So that's not a healthy boundary to have. And yet that's one that I notice a lot online, especially where people feel like I'm slighting them when I don't agree with their perspective. And in my opinion, anytime you join any type of discussion where there's sharing of opinions happening, you really should reconsider whether or not you should be joining it, if the only way you'll be satisfied in that discussion is if you're validated by other people. You should be able to join that discussion and express yourself, and do so with the understanding that no one might validate your opinion, and that's okay, and be able to cope with that. So if you're doing those things for validation, then I would say that is a sign that you need to do the self-work to become more assured with yourself and to not need that validation. And this isn't to say that like you shouldn't want validation, because validation feels good. Like everyone wants to be validated, but feeling the need to have it in order to feel good about yourself is where it becomes a problem. You should feel good about yourself even when people don't like what you're doing, even when people don't agree with you, even when you're at your lowest. You should feel like, I still like myself. I still am valuable. I still have worth. And if you lose that when people don't agree with you, or when you don't feel as lovable or likable in any setting, then that's a problem that needs to be addressed. And the way that I would personally start addressing it is like looking at the way that works for me, because this is kind of how I look at things, is I'm an objective thinker and logic really helps me. So for example, when I first started getting into horse welfare and there were aspects of my horse's care that weren't at the standard that I would like them to be when I was reading the science about it, I looked at it and I went, okay, let's look at how the average horse in my area lives. A lot of them are isolated to individual paddocks in really small areas where they don't even have enough space to do like a few strides a canter. My horses are out on a dry lot that gets muddy in the winter, but they have free choice hay, they can run around, and they're out with other horses. So I would look at it and I'd go, I wish that the footing was better. I wish that it was drier and the drainage was better. I wish that they had more engaging land and enrichment. I wish that they had more hills. I wish that they had more trees. And there's these things that in a perfect world, that I would change. But at its core, in terms of looking at what else is out there in my area and what is realistic to offer, my horses did have all their needs met. So there's aspects where I would feel like they're lacking and that in the long term I would want to change. But I could feel good about the fact that, especially when referencing my location, I was providing the best that I could. And then on top of that, what I am also in control of is monitoring their behavior and seeing how they're doing, monitoring their physical and mental well-being, and keeping an eye on those things and kind of keeping track of all of those factors from an objective purpose. And then it's like when I go online and I have people being like, oh, your horses live in a muddy shithole, like I would never keep my horses like that. I could go and be like, okay, well, like, how are their horses living? And then I would look, and if they're like in a stall paddock situation where they're getting very limited turnout, I would go, I wouldn't want to do that to my horses. I can feel good about where my horses are at, and that person's judging me through the lens of what they're offering their horses. So while it could actually be about them hating that my horses have mud in their turnout, it could also be coming from a place where there's a certain level of insecurity or envy related to the fact that my horses have more space, or that they feel targeted or attacked by the posts that I make about turnout. So looking at that like that and like breaking things down and being like, am I doing the best that I can with the resources that I have? Am I self-aware enough to look at where things are lacking and what I would like to do to fix them in the future? And am I constantly learning and growing and being open to changing things as I move along? And that's a good way of looking at it. And similarly, like I felt really inadequate when I first started getting into rewards-based training because the people who were already further along had certain opinions that made me feel really insecure, where they would share stuff about negative reinforcement and not liking it. And I would feel really attacked by that. But also, like, that's where they are at in their journey. And if I can look at how my horses are responding to me and that they're not actively suffering and that I'm actively trying to learn and grow, then it's like that's something that I can feel good about, where it's like I'm doing my best and I'm making changes as I know more and can do better, and I'm going to continue doing so. So that's the other thing, is like I would get really insecure in the beginning about like what other people were doing for their horses and the hard opinions that they held. And I would feel bad about it. And they would also make me angry. Like the certain opinions make me angry. Like one of the big controversial opinions that used to really trigger me was the horseshoes versus barefoot debate, because Milo had terrible feet and he was like insanely lame without shoes. So he was always in like shoes and wedges and pads and everything. And he had like the whole kitchen sink on, and I didn't know what path to start on in fixing that. So when I saw people essentially calling out his exact shoeing package and saying that it's detrimental to hoof health and that barefoot's better, blah, 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 I felt really triggered by it, and it made me mad at those people. When in reality, if I look back at that, what I was actually mad at is that I didn't see a way out of the situation that I was in. I had tried to advocate for my horse to the farrier. I talked to my vet. I knew that he had too long of a toe, too low of a heel, and that he had thin soles. And I x-rayed his feet, and I was doing everything that I had thought was immediately within my power at that point to fix it, having problems finding the right type of help in order to make a really lasting difference. And I felt trapped. So then when I read these posts where I felt like I was being made to feel like a bad person for not doing enough for his feet, and when people would make comments on my post, it was really triggering, because it wasn't like I was actively trying to neglect those things. I just felt trapped, and there was a lack of help and assistance in the way that I needed. And then when I started to find that help, then it freed me in a way where I was like, okay, I have a path of how I'm going to fix this now, and things are getting better. And now I understand more about shoes and I have more knowledge, so I can go, I don't like certain shoeing packages. I think there's a lot of problems in modern farriery, but there's certain things where it does have a place for like transitioning horses. But that should also come from a place where it's like people, the average horse owner needs to know more about hooves. And I really didn't. So a lot of my insecurities were actually coming from a place of lack of knowledge, and gaining more knowledge and having like a thirst for that knowledge and seeking out more information and just learning more about how things worked so that I could have an opinion on them made me feel less trapped. It made me feel like I had more routes to take to feel good about myself. And it made me feel like there was a lot more options out there, and I could feel more self-assured in the decisions that I was making. And I would say that's probably the biggest game changer that I've had in feeling self-assured, is feeling like I have more options and just understanding things better so that I have a greater wealth of knowledge, which means that there are more choices for me to make by default because I understand more different paths that I could be taking. When you lack knowledge, you could be sitting somewhere and feeling like you only have one path to go on and not seeing the forks in the road because you do not even know that information. So I really firmly believe that knowledge is power, and it is such a huge part of becoming more self-assured, is just being hungry for learning and continuing to chase information, even if it conflicts with what you believe or want to believe. Because I think a huge thing for me too, sorry, Queso's running up against the microphone, so if that's making sounds, that's why. But a huge thing for me was just realizing that I could have an opinion on something and believe it for years and years and years, but that I could also learn of different ways of doing things, and that I could come through that really challenging, despairing moment of feeling like you've had the rug pulled beneath your feet, and I could come past that moment and start anew and find a way brighter life where I've accessed parts of myself that I didn't even know existed prior to that. And like, that's the other thing that I would say is like a hack in terms of becoming more self-assured. Sometimes it involves sitting in despair and like really low moments where your emotions are tanked and where you feel really bad, and just learning that you can, in fact, sit with those terrible feelings, feel them and move through them, because then you realize that you're more resilient than you think. And I think a lot of people lack resiliency because they don't have trust that they can survive these things when they actually absolutely can. And that was like a huge moment for me. So that happened with me when I started to learn more about equine science, and I learned how flawed what I grew up believing good horse management was and good horse training was. And it was like having the veil pulled from my eyes and just like seeing so many things that I had been blind to for so long. And that was really challenging because it made me question everything. And it was a really uncomfortable moment. And by moment, I'm meaning like there was years of this. It's on and off. It's not necessarily several years straight, but it was a lengthy period of time. And learning that I could work through that and get to where I am today, where I'm in a way different place, and I've found things and I've set up my life in a way that I wouldn't have been able to even imagine back then, that has been huge. And it's kind of been reinforcing in itself, where it's like, now that that's happened, I feel really good about the place that I'm in, and I can feel more self-assured because it's like I survived to tell a tale, and I ended up in a place where I'm happier now than I was back then. And I feel better about how I'm showing up for my horses now, even if there was a lot of years of discomfort in the meantime. And a huge part of that was just sitting with the discomfort. And honestly, like outside of horses, I've also found that same thing with like things like breakups, where there's been times where I've put up with a lot of bullshit in relationships where I've been being emotionally abused, and I've forgiven people again and again, and I've stayed in situations too long that I shouldn't have stayed in. And then when they finally end, you feel like the world is ending and that nothing else is going to be good again. Sorry, he's in front of the microphone again. That nothing else is going to be good again, and you feel lonely and you feel worthless because someone that you really cared for made you feel worthless, and you don't really know where to start. But then it's like, as soon as you give it time to just feel those feelings, you work through them and you start to realize, wow, that person treated me like shit. I deserve better than that. And your standards increase as a result, and you learn new means of coping with that discomfort and coming through it better. And then it teaches you lessons that are super useful in the future and that make your life better in the long run. So I would encourage people to look at life like this, where it's like, life isn't meant to feel good and like euphoric and happy all the time. There's going to be really low moments, but even the low moments have something to teach you, even if you can't see it at the time, because oftentimes when you're in the midst of them, you don't understand what you're being taught until you're out of them. And sometimes that's what it's all about. So in the effort of becoming more self-assured and more confident in the decisions that you'd make, I'd say the biggest things are knowledge and learning that making mistakes and being wrong isn't the most shameful thing that you can do. I'd say that the most shameful thing would be to learn that you've made those mistakes, but then continue making them anyways and not having any regard for changing them, where you're so ashamed of the idea of admitting that you're wrong that you just double down and you continue doing something that you've now learned is wrong because you don't want to have to admit to yourself that you did the wrong thing. That's a lot more shameful. There's power and strength in being able to recognize where you went wrong and pivot and adjust your path accordingly. And the more you can kind of embrace the cringe and lean into the fact that it's like, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay for people to think you look stupid sometimes. It's okay for people not to like you. The more you can do that, the more you realize that there's a lot less than you thought to be scared of. And that a lot of the things that you fear, which are generally centered around other people's perceptions of you, aren't within your control. All you control is what you do and the decisions that you make. You can't control how other people perceive them, no matter how much you worry about it and how hard you're thinking about those things. You can't control them. So really what you need to do is just focus on your own path, do all the learning you can, and look at your own situation as objectively as possible and make the best decisions for yourself and expect that everything else will fall into place. Because here's the other thing. If you are altering who you really are and kind of playing a role to be liked by people around you out of fear of like rocking the boat and upsetting people and having things go in a way where you feel cringy or embarrassed or where you've disappointed people, if that's how you live your life, you're always going to be attracting the wrong crowd, because the people who do come into your life, a lot of them, they're going to like this mask of yourself that you've put out. They're not actually going to be liking you for who you are. They're going to be liking the projection of you that you've made up to try to earn their favor. Where on the flip side, if you're yourself, there might be people who just do not like you and want nothing to do with you. That's a reality of that. But even if you're lonely for a time, you're going to attract the right types of people who truly like you for who you are. And they'll be the types of people who are your ride or dies and who are going to be around and supporting of you no matter what happens. And those are the people that you really want and need in your life, because they're the ones who are going to be the most consistent and loyal supporters. They're going to be your mentors. They're going to be your peer support group. They're going to be the people whose opinion really matters because they love you for who you are. And part of that love will be potentially checking you when you need it and being honest with where growth is needed and putting you in your place when you need it. And it'll be easier to accept that from those people because it'll be coming from a place of love. It's not going to be coming from a place of envy or jealousy or hate or projection. It's going to be coming from a place of people who love you and want you to be your best self, who have no ulterior motives and who have been with you through the good and the bad, through the cringe, through your high moments, through everything. And they just are looking out for you. And that creates safety too, because you're not feeling like you always have to be playing a role in order to earn the favor of these people and feel worthy of them or have them want to be around you. So honestly, like a huge part of becoming more assured of yourself and your own decisions is being open to being wrong, being open to looking cringe, being open to being disliked by people, and continuing to be yourself anyways. And it sounds really scary, but like honestly, there's no time where I've been more unhappy than when I was people pleasing the most and where I was playing a role and I was trying to meet standards that were set by other people and weren't within my personal standards or morals, and where I didn't even really know what I liked and disliked because I hadn't given myself the chance to actually do things for myself. It was all about doing things that the crowds that I were in were doing and things that I thought would impress them and things that I thought would bring me friends or make people like me more in those settings. And even I just turned 29. Like, I'm still learning what I like and I'm still learning who I am because I spent a lot of years not being myself. And there's nothing that is more soul crushing than extinguishing who you really are to try to pull in the favor of people who don't actually really even like or care about you, who they might like what they can get from you. They might like how you make them feel in certain capacities, but they don't actually like who you are because you're having to play a role to keep them in your life. And then that also feeds into your insecurities and making you feel less worthy because internally, whether or not you consciously are aware of it, internally, your body knows that you're repressing parts of yourself in order to feel like you need to fit in. And then you're also constantly going to be anxious because, again, you're playing a role. You're not being yourself. You're playing a role that you think will draw people in the most. And there can be a time or place for doing that for like safety reasons or within certain scenarios where you can't fully be yourself because you're at work or whatever. There's a time and place for that. But doing it all the time, like especially in your free time and times where you should be relaxing and be at ease, that's where it becomes a problem. And a lot of people, the longer you mask for, you hit a point where you don't even realize that you aren't being yourself. So honestly, like sitting with yourself more, whether you're feeling good or bad, feeling those bad feelings, if you're feeling bad, and just looking at the decisions you're making and asking yourself, is this actually what I want? Do I actually feel good about this? Is this actually how I feel? Or am I projecting the ideals set by other people, the standards set by other people? Ask yourself those questions. And also remember that it's better to have a really small, tight-knit group of people who actually love you for who you are than it is to be surrounded by a crowd of people who like the persona that you're putting on that isn't really you. Because even if it feels good in the short term, in the long run, it's going to burn you out and you're going to feel crappy about it. So that's kind of what I do on my channels and whatnot, is like, I know that a lot of people don't resonate with the stuff that I say and they don't like it. They can nitpick every little tiny thing that I say and take issue with all of the ways that I should have and could have done things better. They can do that, but there's also a lot of people who do resonate with what I say, who have felt how I've felt, and who are able to come to terms with that because I've put it into words that resonate with them, and that's great. And also what I've learned in my time, like especially being in the public eye and kind of growing and fumbling so much where people can directly see it, is that a lot of the people who are my heaviest critics aren't doing what they're telling me to do. They're picking apart what I'm doing and trying to make my advocacy perfect, or my writing perfect, or the way I come across perfect, and essentially make it my responsibility to put myself out there in a way that appeals to and resonates with every person on this planet, and telling me what I could have and should have done. But they are not walking the walk. They're not putting themselves out there in the way that they're saying I should, and setting an example for themselves. If they did do that, they would learn very quickly that even if they did all of these things that they're telling me to do, it's not going to land with everybody. It's not going to resonate with everybody. But they're fixated on picking apart what I'm doing, because oftentimes it's a way to not look at yourself and to focus on like the flaws in someone's own advocacy, to avoid looking at either the information they're putting out or yourself and how you could be contributing in your own way. It's a lot easier to be negative and critical of people out there who are triggering you than it is to actually look inward and do things. And there's a different means of doing this, because I would say being critical of people when they're being unkind to others, or when they're being unkind to like animals or whatever, or they're otherwise their existence is perpetuating harm in some capacity. Being critical of those actions is a lot different than just criticizing a person. You can be critical of those actions without making it about a singular person. And those things are valid. But when someone is existing in a way that's pretty harmless in their own little section of the universe, and they're not actively causing harm to others with their existence, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, if they rub you the wrong way, just move on. And this is another thing that I would encourage people to do in being self-assured, is like, don't hate follow people. If someone rubs you the wrong way and irritates the shit out of you, don't spend your time watching their content and just getting mad about it and then bitching about them to your friends. Don't do that. And like everyone, I feel like, has done that at some point, like whether it's someone that you went to school with, it's someone online or whatever. If you're spending a lot of your time going out of your way to interact with that specific person again and again and again, and being irritated by it, and then also the way that social media algorithms work, the more you do that, the more they're going to get recommended to you. If they are impacting your well-being to a strong extent, where you cannot let it go, and where seeing something that they post is an immediate trigger to you, you should block them, or you should mute them from your timeline, because that is completely useless. You're not going to change how that person exists. You're not going to change their social media and what they choose to share by watching it and being angry about it and bitching about them behind their back. That's not going to happen. If they're doing something and putting something out into the universe that is actually harmful to others, then focus on that action, because odds are, if it's truly harmful, it's not going to be specific to that one person. It's going to be something that a lot of people are guilty of. And sure, while you could use them as an example of that, it's a general enough concept that you could fight against that concept without fixating on that person. So stay away from people who make you feel triggered and negative, and who are bringing out the worst parts of you, where you get stuck on just being negative about other people and kind of taking the attention off of yourself and how you feel about yourself, and not fixating on that, because it's not healthy. And it's something that I see a lot of people do on social media. In like little ways. It can be with influencers. It can be with people you went to school with. It can be with your partner's exes. I've seen a lot of people do it with, and it's like, don't even go fucking look at their shit. Like, don't. Why are you doing that? there's nothing good that can come out of that. The only way it would kind of make sense is if they're like still commenting on your partner's stuff or something and you're curious. But it's like, other than that, it's like if you're doing it from a place of jealousy or vindictiveness or insecurity, there's nothing that'll ever come out of that, because you could go and look at them and you could go, wow, they're way prettier than me. Or if you don't do that, you could go, wow, they're so ugly, I'm so much better than them, which is also just as fucking toxic. So don't do that. It's not going to help you feel better about yourself. It's not going to help you feel more self-assured. It's just kind of displacing the discomfort of actually working on the aspects of yourself that aren't feeling good, and kind of making it filler where you're just degrading someone else to feel better about yourself. Or in the case where it's like you think that that person's better than you could end up ruining your own personal relationships by being jealous of that person when your partner has no feelings towards them anymore. So be careful about that too, because ultimately it's like you should be self-assured enough and love yourself enough to just kind of sit with the fact where it's like, someone's going to love me for me, and if they don't, that's their loss, and I'll let them go. And that's kind of where I'll leave this podcast, where it's like, if someone doesn't like you, let them. If they don't want to be your friend, let them. If they're not going to be good to you, let them. Keep the people in your life who actually want to do those things. Keep the people in your life who are solid and who value your feelings and who want to be around you and who want to be there for you and who you don't have to nag or try to force or try to push to be with you. Keep the people in your life that make you feel good about yourself, who you don't have to question their intentions, because they're straightforward with what those intentions are. Keep the people in your life who make you feel good about yourself and who are consistent and who help with your insecurities instead of making them worse, or who are honest with you in a way where it's like they give you space where you can work on your insecurities because they check you when you need it. And honestly, that's what good friends do. Good friends and like good family members and good mentors, they won't just tell you what you want to hear all the time. They might tell you things that might sting a little sometimes, but there'll be parts of yourself that you can grow and work on if you listen to them. So it's not always going to be butterflies and rainbows, and self-growth does involve oftentimes feeling really shitty at times. And it's just all part of the process. So I encourage people to do that. That's kind of like what my journey has been these last several years. And like, I'm hoping this year is going to be kind of like hitting a point in that where it's like everything's getting better, because I've hit a point where it's like I'm doing a lot more stuff for myself now. In the past, I wasn't doing stuff for myself, and I was doing stuff like for other people, or like centering my schedules around other people, like especially partners that I was with romantically, and like prioritizing what they'd want to do, or where like I wouldn't go do the things that I wanted to do if I had to do them alone, which meant that there was a lot of times where I just didn't get to do the things that I wanted to do because I always wanted to have someone with me. And now I've started hiking a lot alone, and like I've realized that oftentimes I actually like solo hiking more. And like I have a goal now where I want to hike 1,000 kilometers this year, and I'm already at 58 kilometers, and it's only January 9th. So this month I'm probably going to hit 60 kilometers. And then by February, I'll probably already be 10% of the way done my goal, if not more than that. Like I would say there's a good chance, or sorry, like this month I'm probably going to hit 100 kilometers. This is what I meant to say. Obviously I'm going to hit 60 because it's only 2 kilometers more. But this month I'm probably going to hit 100 kilometers and I'll be 10% to my goal. And it's just like little things like that where it's like I realized that made me feel good. When I was feeling really down in the dump after some shitty relationships, I started hiking, and I realized that the exercise from that made me feel better. And initially, I'll admit, it was really hard to get out the door, especially when the weather was shitty. But then the more I started hiking in the rain and just going and getting myself out there, I realized how much better I felt after, and the reinforcement of that made it easier to just get up and go all the time. So I recommend doing things like that, where it's like the things that are really healthy for you and that you might even really like in the future aren't necessarily always going to feel really good right away. And getting out the door and actually doing them, getting out of bed and actually doing them is the hardest part. But it is so necessary. And like when people would tell me this stuff about like self-care and like self-love, I would kind of scoff at the idea that like going for a walk, or like getting up in the morning and exercising, or like doing these things where you're showing your mind and your body love in some way, I would scoff at the idea that it could actually make that much of a difference, but it is true. And you just need to give it time. And you also just need to commit to the process and understand that it's not going to feel good right away. Or it won't, sorry, that's my chair. It's not always going to feel good right away. It's not always going to be easy right away, but it's like when you do it consistently, you'll find that it does feel really good. Another thing that I was doing really well last year that I need to do better now, because like the last like 8 months I've been slacking, but I started it in like fall 2023, was stretching every day. And I realized how much better my body felt when I was doing that. So I need to get in the habit of doing that now. And I'm going to start trying to do it every day. Also, journaling was something that I did. And journaling's nice because if there's like these thoughts and feelings that you have, or things that you really desperately want that you like want to manifest, sometimes you'll feel that way about things, but if you don't write it down, then if you actually get that thing that you've desperately wanted, you don't have the same time-stamped marker of like all the times that you've said that you want those things. So journaling's good for that, but it's also a place where you can put your emotions down on paper without judgment. And that's what I've been doing too, where I've been trying to journal regularly, even if it's just one sentence, even if it's just one word, and it's been helping. So talking about these things, whether it's to yourself in a journal or to a therapist or to a trusted friend, is really good. But also like doing things for yourself and like doing things that you want to do, even if you have to do them alone. That's like one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give to people is don't wait and hold off on these things that you really want to do just because you don't want to do them alone. A lot of times you'll have just as much fun, if not more fun, alone. And if you hold off until you have someone to go with, you might never do it. So just some food for thought. And also, just as a takeaway too, life is always ebbing and flowing. Your emotions are going to be like the tides. Sometimes you'll be way far out there and not feeling good, but then or I guess the better analogy would be sometimes the tide's going to be in and really high and you're going to be super emotional and it's going to feel all consuming. But then sooner enough, it'll start to recede again and then it'll be out. So it's like things come and go, and learning how to sit with your emotions is a strength that can also be built. And honestly, in the midst of things, when you're feeling really shitty, it never feels good. And like when something really hard happens, it always feels like I'm never going to overcome this. This is the worst pain that I've ever felt. But then when you sit with it, you realize that it does pass. And it doesn't always pass completely because grief is a funny thing that'll come and go. But you realize that you can grow around that grief and that you can make a life around it. And I would say a huge part of that also is just like being the main character in your own life and prioritizing yourself enough that it's like your life isn't centered around the decisions and desires of other people, and that you're actually doing the things that you as a person want to do, and that you're not centering your life around other people. And really think about that, because a lot of us don't necessarily think that we're doing that, but then if you look back at it, you are. Especially with romantic partners is a big one. So anyways, sorry for like this podcast not necessarily being the way that I usually do things at the end of the year. It's just been a lot. Like there's been a lot of stuff going on and it's been really stressful, and I've just been really burnt out because so like anyways, for context, I guess this is going to be in my recap too, but like the last like several months I've been going through a breakup, and then I needed to find a roommate for where I live because otherwise my rent was going to double. And then I found one with a friend who was supposed to let me know for sure by December 1st if they couldn't move in. And the plan was for them to move in up until December 26th, at which point they told me they were not going to be moving in, which, as I'm sure many of you can imagine, with 5 days notice before the start of the month, that fucking sucks. Especially like my thing was that like, okay, if you can't even pay for the first month or like not for all of it, it's like, okay, you could work it off with like some of the horse chores or pay less rent this month, but that's better than nothing where I'm not having to pay for the full rent or I get it offset by chores. Even if it was for January, February, it was a deal that had been made. And anyways, having that bailed on was really hard for me financially, and it's a major source of stress for that for sure, because now it's like my costs have doubled and I don't have any barn chores because they bailed on that too. So I'm still doing the same amount of work, but then now I need to work harder because of that. And it's been super stressful. And it's like literally since the day after Christmas. And then it's like my birthday is exactly 2 weeks after Christmas. So that was coming up too. And there's just been so much shit going on. And honestly, for me, like it's always disappointing, like when people say that they're going to do something and then they don't do it, especially when it's a big thing where you can look at it. Like anyone could look at that and go, yeah, like if I bail on this thing last minute, this is going to really inconvenience and stress this person out. And it always really bothers me when people do stuff like that, because it's just like one of those things where there's no way you didn't have those feelings beforehand, and where you couldn't have voiced those things beforehand. And then waiting until the last minute to do that creates unnecessary tension and anger and resentment, which like obviously I was angry. And like honestly, I think it was rightfully so, because like it was just like such a shit thing. Because also, for those of you who don't rent yet, even if someone is on like a 30-day contract to rent, you have to give a month's notice before moving out. So in order to like find someone who could even move in for February, like I would have had, if they're already renting a place, they would have had to be ready to, like, I would have had to find them within 5 days so that they could give their notice on January 1st so that they could move in. So it's kind of like effectively put me in a pickle for like at least 2 months, which is really frustrating. And then also, since I have my animals here, it's like I don't want to just let anybody into my house because they have free access to my animals, and like a lot of my business stuff's in the house. And it's just like a huge invasion of privacy. And like with how weird some people have been online and how invasive in my life they've been from afar, the idea of potentially having someone like that inside my house with me was like very, very scary. Anyways, like my best friend is supposed to be moving in April, so that's great, but it does mean that now I have like 3 months that I have to sort out for rent, where costs are going to be way, way higher, which is really stressful. So that's kind of why I've taken time away, that and the holidays, because obviously that stressor wasn't a thing until December 26th. But anyways, that's kind of why it's been hard. So anyways, anyone interested in joining my Patreon, now would be a great time to do that, because things are going to be stressful as hell for like the next 3 months. Or if you're interested in shopping my store, I have a bunch of clearance items on sale for like bridles, apparel, and more, as well as regularly stocked items. That's shopmilestonespodcast.com. Also linked in the show notes. And then my Patreon's patreon.com/SDEQUUS. Also linked in the show notes. There's also a tip jar on PayPal if anyone wants to do a one-time tip. I also have webinars on my training website. And then as always, like liking and sharing any of my videos, reviewing the podcast, subscribing to my YouTube, sharing videos, commenting on them, boosting them, all that stuff helps because it gets my content looked at more. So it helps with the algorithm. And then sometimes I get bonuses on like Facebook and whatnot when people comment on my stuff. They just have to be like authentic comments. So it can't be like spamming shit. But yeah, so anyways, anyone interested in doing that would be abundantly helpful and I would really appreciate it. And I'll keep y'all posted with that. And my year recap will be out like next week, so stay tuned. Anyways, thank you for bearing with me, and I hope this resonated with some people, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you so much for tuning into the Making Milestones podcast this week. If you are interested in ways that you can help support the podcast, it would be greatly appreciated if you would leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help to promote the podcast in the algorithm, allowing me to connect with new listeners, and it is so greatly appreciated. Some other ways you can help to support the podcast include subscribing to my Patreon channel, where you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month and access monthly Q&As, behind-the-scenes content, training help, and more. Every subscription helps, and they help to offset any costs associated with the podcast, allowing me to keep most of these episodes ad-free. I also have an online store where I sell equestrian athletic apparel, graphic t-shirt and hoodie designs, horse bridles, both bitted and bitless, and you can check that out in the podcast description as well. Lastly, I have my main website where I have a bunch of webinars with different types of training topics, and where I also offer online training consultations if you want a one-on-one appointment with me. All of this helps me continue doing what I'm doing, and your support is so appreciated.